Hi there, this is Heather Vickery. Welcome to the Brave Files podcast. I am so glad you decided to tune in today. This week, I talked to Leah Carey from the Good Girls Talk About Sex podcast. It's a fantastic, humorous, and entertaining conversation about our right to explore every element of living a happy and healthy life, including a fulfilling sex life. We also discuss sexual experiences from a non-judgmental and non-shaming lens, and how to get comfortable with your body again after experiencing trauma. Just a little heads up, we do discuss sexual and emotional abuse in this conversation. But don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss this episode.
Sex, reclamation, and healing.
This is Heather Vickery, and you're listening to The Brave Files, stories from people living courageously. When we choose bravely in big and small ways, it powerfully elevates our lives. I hope these stories connect with you and encourage you to embrace bravery in every possible way, day after day. Together, we can build a movement of courageous living that enriches both our lives and our communities. And if you enjoy the show, I ask you to please share it with others. Maybe think of someone who you want to choose bravely right alongside you. Thanks for tuning in. Now here's the show. Welcome and thanks for tuning in to The Brave Files. I'm your host, Heather Vickery, and today we're talking about sex, baby. Okay, we are going to talk about sex, but in the context of our guest, Leah Carey's story. Leah grew up in a very strict family. She was what she calls a consummate good girl. It was an abusive home, and it gave her a lot of really confusing messages about sex. It turns out she was left without tools to build healthy and intimate relationships, and she completely lacked the ability to advocate for her own pleasure, which is something that's incredibly important. Leah's here to tell us how she overcame this history, traveled the U.S. on a journey to heal old sexual issues, reclaim her bodily autonomy, and learn how to enjoy sex. She's also the host of Good Girls Talk About Sex podcast, so you can tell she's come a long way. Leah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Heather. I am absolutely thrilled to be here.
I am thrilled to have you here. It's going to be fun, but before we can get to the fun, let's maybe talk about the less fun. Can you share with us a little bit about what life was like when you were growing up?
Yeah. So like you said, it was really, really confusing. I lived in a home where my father was an alcoholic. He was one of those people who everybody in the community loved him. And then he came home and was really awful to me and my mom. So it felt like there was nowhere to go because I couldn't destroy his reputation out in the world. So
it's a tough position to be in for sure.
It really, really was. And part of his abusive nature was to talk to me sexually about myself and other people.
Okay, wait. What does that mean?
It means
about yourself.
Yeah. So he would make sexual comments about my body. He would talk to me about super inappropriate things for my age and the fact that he was my father. Those were just not conversations we should be having. And then on top of that, he would talk to me about his sex life with my mom and how unhappy he was with it.
How old were you when this started?
I was, there's some big blank spots in my memory, but I can say for certain that it had started by the time I was about 10.
Oh my God. Did your mom know? Did he do this in front of your mom?
No. I mean, he was terribly emotionally abusive to her as well.
Of course.
But part of that was trying to keep us away from each other. Not away from each other. I mean, we all lived in the same house. Right. But to put wedges between us, to tell me that my mother was a terrible person who was trying to keep me from him, stuff like that.
It's classic abuser behavior.
Totally classic. Yeah. He would also speak to women who were not my mother sexually in front of me.
Okay. So can you give me, I understand when you say he spoke sexually and inappropriately about your body, but when you say he spoke to women other than your mother sexually, can you give us an example?
Yeah, he would say things like if he was on the phone with them and I was in the room, he'd be like, "So, what are you
Oh,
wearing?"
geez.
Yeah. Or if I was in the room, maybe he would have his hand on them and make a sexually suggestive comment.
So I have to ask, I mean, it definitely sounds abusive, but I wonder how much of that is abusive personality versus macho patriarchal. Like, I know so many
Mm.
men who do that and get away with that. Fewer now, but when I was growing up, men behaved that way all the time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So for a long time, I tried to maintain the fiction of my father's grand amazingness
Mm,
so that everyone else in his community didn't have to deal with the fact that he was something other than what they saw.
right,
Like I didn't for years I knew about Al-Anon, the program for family members of
right.
alcoholics. But I didn't go because I thought, well, if I walk into that building, then everyone will know that he's an alcoholic and that will destroy his reputation.
Mm.
Totally not putting together that if they were there, they had issues too. But
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, you were a kid. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So part of it was just the abuse situation. But my big sort of revelation happened that kicked me into the healing story that we're going to talk about today happened when Trump was elected
Hmm.
because I was watching this man on TV and getting really, really triggered by him in ways that I didn't understand.
I hear that all the time.
I know. I know. I've talked to so many therapists who say that after his election, there was just a wave of women coming in with old trauma being retriggered. And I was one of them.
So gross.
Yeah. I mean, not to go down the political path, but purely about the personality that this man was demonstrating. I was watching him, and suddenly one day it got clear to me I'm watching my father on screen.
Oh,
My father was vastly smarter, but the um, the characteristics and the behaviors that he was exhibiting.
and the narcissism, I maybe hear a little of
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
Totally. Which is when I started, because a lot of people were starting to post articles about narcissism. I
Hmm.
started reading them and I was like, oh my God, I'm reading about my childhood.
Wow.
So my father's been dead for 19 years now. So obviously I'm not going to, post-mortem diagnose him with
Right. Right.
narcissism. But I think, I can tell you that when I look at the list of after effects of children of narcissists, I can check almost every
Yeah.
box. So,
So, what I'm wondering is if your father was sexually inappropriate and sexually explicit, what were the messages to you about sex?
yeah.
Was there, on paper, it reads like you were told sex is bad and don't do that, but that's not really what I'm hearing. So I'm curious, yeah, what were the messages you were getting about sex?
So there were two really specific things I was hearing that were completely contradictory.
Okay.
And that I think is what confused me so much. One was my father was telling me very blatantly, you're fat and ugly, and
Ugh,
no one will ever be attracted to you.
that's not true, by the way.
Thank you. I'm learning, I still have a lot of days when it's hard, but I'm
Yeah.
learning.
Yeah.
The other message was that he had to lock me in my room until I was 30 so that boys couldn't get to me. So on one hand, I was being told that no one would ever want me. And on the other hand, I was being told that I was going to be wanted so much that he had to keep me away from them.
Which is also classic abuser
Mm-hmm.
behavior.
Absolutely.
Did he ever do anything inappropriate beyond language with you?
He put his hands on me once, and he was blackout drunk at the time. And thank God he did not get his hands under my clothes. He was mauling me, but it all stayed on top of my clothes. I think because he was too drunk to be able to manually go any further. But
I'm
yeah,
sorry. How old were you at that time?
I think I was 12.
And old enough to know that was not okay.
It was not okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At what point did you realize this behavior was detrimental?
I was in and out of therapy from the time I was a teenager.
Okay.
I got to college, and there was one weekend when I sort of had an emotional breakdown. I started crying like on a Thursday night, and by Sunday I was still crying. And it had started because I was reading a book. I can't remember if it was for a class or something else, but I was reading a book that had some description of what it was like to recover from sexual trauma.
Hmm.
And it triggered something very deep in me. And the woman was talking about how she didn't remember her abuse, but it was like there were black holes in her memory. But what was she going to do? Just not clean it up? No, she was going to do the work, even though she couldn't retrieve the memory. And that really sat with me because I had been having therapists say to me for years, you have all the classic markers of someone who has been sexually abused, but you don't have any memory of it. I did not understand at the time that what I had been experiencing and could remember was actually sexual abuse because it didn't include the hands-on piece. And so, I at one point went to a support group in college for those who had been through sexual abuse. But I left after two or three sessions because all of the other women in the group could detail their abuse history, very, very specifically with names and maybe not dates, but, really specific. And all I had was this general sense that something bad had happened. And, there was this one night when my dad put his hands on me, but he didn't actually, there was no skin to skin contact. Right. So that doesn't count. It turns out all of it does.
It does. I so appreciate that you bring this to light. And for anyone listening, mental and emotional abuse counts.
Yeah.
It counts. I was unbelievably emotionally abused by a boyfriend in college. And I didn't realize it until many years later, probably not even until to the full extent until maybe, in the last 7 to 10 years. And again, we get in those positions, I think from my experience, you can tell me if it's your experience as well, because of this patriarchal society we live in, what we're told is acceptable and not acceptable, and don't overreact and don't be so sensitive and all this and that. But then interestingly enough, and I haven't shared this with anyone, and I wonder if any of these folks listen to the show, my college roommate, who I've kept in and out of touch with, asked me about this ex-boyfriend a few months ago. Do you ever think about him? And I said, oh, wow, what an interesting thing for you to ask me. No, not really. And she said, he knows that he was really horrible to you.
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, that's good. I'm glad he knows that. Mm-hmm. He should know that. And I said, I wish him no ill will, but I do want him to know that it was not okay. And I do talk to my children about it in a way that, having survived this level of abuse. Mm-hmm. But what it showed me is that I've grown. I didn't need anything from him. I didn't have to prove anything to him. I didn't need an apology from him. It wasn't about him. I didn't care about him. I cared about me.
Yeah. Because of the messages I got from my dad about how no one would ever love me, no one would ever be attracted to me. And, this formative relationship that, psychologists will tell us that we sort of go out and look for our father for our relationships.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I went out and I didn't start dating until quite late out of college. And I didn't have sex for the first time till I was 25.
That's fascinating because it
That
could have gone the other way.
absolutely. Yeah. There are a couple of different ways that people go. They either shut down or they try to find that love that they were missing everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I went the shutdown route. And there are other ways that people deal with it too. I don't want to make it's like such a grand sweeping generalization, but those are sort of the two big categories.
Absolutely.
So I had a string of, I call them my three big bads, like I had three relationships with men who were really, really, really not good for me. The first one was the most sort of classically emotionally abusive. And he and I were not in touch. Like we broke up. I got him out of my life. And then what was it? 15 years later, I heard from him out of the blue.
Wow.
And he said, I'd like to talk to you. And he had something going on in his life that he needed somebody to talk to. And he knew that I would be able to listen.
Ugh.
No, I'm actually really glad we had the conversation because even though he called for that emotional support, I know, gross, but, but during that conversation, we were able to apologize to each other in a way that I never would have imagined could happen. He was able to say to me, I know that I treated you horribly and I'm so sorry. And it's because I was in so much pain and I didn't have any idea that I was supposed to deal with that.
Yeah.
And I was able to say to him, I don't take any responsibility for the way that he treated me, but I do take responsibility for staying in that relationship and being angry, spending so much of my time being angry and resentful of him rather than figuring out how to get out.
Right. That's powerful. That's some serious self-ownership there to a level most of us can't ever achieve. I really think that forgiveness is powerful. I wrote an entire course on the power of forgiveness, and it's not about those who you forgive. It's about us.
Totally. Yeah.
Right. And so releasing that. So that apology may have gone to him, but it sounds like you were apologizing to yourself and forgiving yourself.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And like you said, by the time he gave me the apology, it stunned me.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I was really grateful for it. But ultimately, I didn't really need it.
Wow. Good for you. Did you end up in physically abusive relationships?
Thank God I never did.
Okay.
That was sort of the one thing that I was really clear on. If anybody laid their hands on me, that was going to be an absolute red line. However,
you say that. That's why I laughed. I literally, and I wasn't laughing at that, but I've said those things about that same college boyfriend. Mm-hmm. I wish he'd hit me. Because if he'd hit me, I would have
left.
And then I go, but would I have?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question.
That's the me today saying I would have known better, but I don't know that the me then would have known better.
I think that I was always really clear that physical violence, like hitting, was absolutely not okay with me. And to be fair, I didn't experience that. Like, that's not something that had been normalized for me. Same. My father used words. He didn't use his fists. However, what I did not recognize was that them putting their hands on me sexually and pushing me into sexual acts that I wasn't ready for was very, 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 very similar to them putting their hands on me in anger. I just didn't know that I was allowed to say no.
That's right. I feel you on that. When I haven't spoken about this much, but when I lost my virginity, I was 16 years old, and I lost it because he pressured me. Mm-hmm. Come on. And I finally was like, well, okay. And, I don't know how much of that was lack of strength in me versus, again, community, patriarchy, like you got to do what these boys want you to do.
Absolutely.
But I absolutely now have come to terms with the fact that it was not okay. it was assault. It's not, I tell my daughters, I have 4 daughters, it's not okay for somebody to pressure you into something that you're not ready to do. That's
Yeah.
abuse.
I hear from so many, because I now have these conversations with women about their sex lives all the time. That's what my podcast is me talking to women about their sex lives. And what I hear so often is women saying, well, it wasn't really assault. It wasn't really because I didn't say no, or I didn't fight him off, or maybe I said no once, but it wasn't strong enough. And that, okay, let's just all
not your fault.
Not your fault. There's coercion and there's full on assault, and they require very different tactics, maybe sometimes all used at the same time, but they're different tactics, but they are still pushing you to partake in a sexual act that you don't want, and that is not okay. I don't care how much you say no. In those early relationships, I never said no, but I had a whole lot of sex that I didn't want. With that first boyfriend, we were together for 2 years. I cried literally every time we had sex because it was so painful.
Yeah.
And he never, I don't know if he was blind or if he was willfully ignorant.
Care. Yeah.
Yeah. The only time he ever mentioned it, there were 2 times that I can remember over the course of 2 years when he said, I wish you wouldn't cry. It makes it less good for me.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Instead of like, maybe we shouldn't be doing this, sweetheart.
Right.
Like, oh, that makes my skin.
Yeah, I know. It's so gross. It's so gross. But neither of us had any understanding that if we did something a little bit different sexually, because the basic story is boy gets turned on, boy wants sex, boy enters girl, like that is sort of how our sexual.
Not at my house, but yes.
Well, but we're not taught anything different.
You're right. Absolutely right.
It's definitely, if you're watching TV or movies, that's what we see. We see a kiss with a big swell of music, and then they're naked in bed.
Yep.
And there's nothing in between. I had no understanding that if there was a little bit more of a different kind of play, maybe my body would start to get actually turned on,
right,
and lubricated so that it didn't hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have 4 daughters, and at this point they're presenting straight, but I didn't come out until 38. So who knows? But teaching them that sex is not intercourse.
Yes.
There's so much more to sex. There are a lot of different ways to have sex, and it all counts.
Yes.
So let's talk about that. Like, so obviously you've learned a lot and you've grown a lot. And did this you made this decision to pack up and travel. Tell us a little bit about that decision and what you thought would come from it, but then what actually came from it.
Yeah, those are 2 very different things. So I had been working with a therapist in sort of a bunch of things happened at once. My mom passed away.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. She and I were really, really close. And that was hard. She passed away, thank goodness, before the election. I'm really glad she didn't have to watch what's going on now in our country.
Wow. That's a big statement.
I'm
glad my mom's gone before this idiot took office. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I miss her every day.
Of course.
But yeah. So she passed away. The election happened, and I got so triggered. So I went into therapy looking at those 2 things. And over the course of the therapy, I started doing a lot better. And I also sold my mom's house, which meant that I had a pot of money that I had never had before.
Okay.
And I was still living in rural New Hampshire, which is where I grew up. because that's where my mom was. And it was important to me to be close to her. With her gone, there was no reason for me to stay there any longer. So my therapist and I worked together to get me to a place where I was going to go out on the road I didn't have a plan. I was going to go do a solo road trip around the country for up to a year and just see the country and see where I wanted to live, like try out lots of different places and see where I wanted to live next. The moment in my therapy that cannot help but make me laugh is that in the final 15 minutes of my final session with her, she said to me, you've done such good work. I really think you're ready. We just have a few minutes. Is there anything else that you want to talk about before you get on the road? And I turned to her and I said, well, there's this one thing I've never mentioned. I don't have any sexual sensation.
Let's just drop that tiny little bomb.
Just a little thing. We can totally deal with that in 15 minutes, right? She would have been well within her rights to laugh me out of her office, but she was wonderful. And she said, well, that's not really part of my specialty, but you're going to be on the road. And I bet you're going to be going through lots of places where you could find a sex therapist. Right. And so maybe, you could go do a couple of sessions with a sex therapist and work some on this. And honestly, I had been thinking about seeing a sex therapist for years. Mm-hmm. I had even been thinking about like hiring a sex worker just to figure out what the hell was going on with my body. Like, why was I not feeling anything?
I think that's fascinating. That topic recently came up in a private Facebook group I'm in. It's not a dirty Facebook group. It's business women, but it's like, would you ever do this? And the conversation was really, men do it all the time. Sure. Why wouldn't you hire somebody who knows what they're doing to teach you what you want to learn?
Exactly. Except that I didn't do it because I thought, well, I'm not that kind of girl. Yeah. And what did I mean by that kind of girl? I don't know. It's partly about my image of myself as a good girl. Mm-hmm. It's also partly about how thoroughly I had bought into my father's idea that nobody would ever want me. And so therefore, what was the point? I wasn't worth it anyway.
Wow. So did you visit with the sex therapist on the tour?
So I finally, once she said that, I was like, ooh, maybe this is something I could try. I did not ultimately specifically see a sex therapist, but I had done some reading about a technique called tantric massage. Mm. And it's specifically, one of the things that it deals with is overcoming numbness. Okay. Another name for it is yoni massage. It is an external and an internal procedure. And the goal is to help women come back into their bodies. Like so many of us have had so much trauma that takes us out of our bodies. This is about helping us come back into our bodies and start to feel again and move through the numbness. Those of us who have had a lot of experience of being entered before we were ready. What I have discovered over these several years of exploration is that my body numbed out because there was so much pain involved that my body was like, yeah, we're not going to do this anymore. We're just going to stop feeling. Mm. So I went to this, when I was in New York City, I found this woman who did tantric massage. I had to go through a lot of sex worker profiles to find someone who seemed like because they are sex workers. Right. And at this point, I am all about sex workers. Like I have gotten so much healing out of my couple of experiences with people who are technically sex workers that I'm like, go do the thing, just make it happen. If that speaks to you, do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had to go through a lot of profiles of sex workers, and a lot of them I was looking for something very specific. I was looking for somebody who was going to work with me toward healing as opposed to just like getting off.
Yeah.
That took some time and some effort, but I spent 3 hours with her, and it was a really transformative experience at the end. And it was both external massage and internal touch, all of which she gave very explicit explanations of what she was going to do and got very explicit consent from me.
Wow.
To do it.
Wow.
And at the end, she sat me down and she said, I want you to know that you're not broken. Your body functions exactly the way it's supposed to. I can see and hear from our interactions that the pleasure signals are not reaching your brain yet. And so there's some emotional barriers still going on that you can work on, but your physical body is responding exactly the way that you would expect it to. Wow. You're not broken. That was huge.
Yeah. I didn't even know that sort of thing existed.
Right? I didn't either until I experienced it. Thank God that therapist told me. Like, it's okay for you to go explore this thing, because I don't know if I would have had the courage had she not said it to me.
Wow.
So that's why I'm like always saying to women, it's okay, go do the thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And don't be shamed or feel like it makes you not good or any of those things. You have every right to explore that element of living a happy and healthy life that anybody else does.
Yes.
So was that in the very beginning?
That was at the very beginning of my trip.
Okay.
So this was happening in, I think it was 2017, whatever it was. Craigslist Personals was still running. It has now been taken down, long with Craigslist Personals. Because while I was traveling around the country, that gave me a great way to meet people. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people are really scared when they hear me say that. I sort of developed my way of vetting people and feeling like I at least had some modicum of control over the situation. And I started going out and having experiences.
Good for you.
At first it was just dating, like allowing myself to see myself as someone who dated, as opposed to somebody who just fell into a relationship with whoever the closest guy was who seemed to show me some attention.
I love though that's so bold and adventurous too, to take up Craig's personal list. I've never done that. I've also never online dated. I just never had to. But I know people who have and who've had similar experiences where they like just make friends. And when I say hook up, I mean, maybe they physically hooked up, but just, got tours of cities by people who live there by these personal ads on Facebook or on Craigslist. It's great.
Yeah,
I love it.
It's great. And, I went out on a date with a guy and I was working. I had also, while I was on the road, sort of quite by accident and by great good fortune, found a woman who's a body image coach and was working.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. Was working with her on the phone. And she is very sex positive and was so incredibly supportive as I went through this journey. I don't know that I would have been able to do it without her, or at least not come out of it on the other side quite so healthy.
Body positivity is so important from all of the things that we've talked about.
Absolutely.
From all of them.
Yeah. So I went out on a date with a guy and he wanted to see me again. And I had a call with my coach, Jesse, the next morning. And I said, Jesse, I'm only going to be here for another couple of days. And I'm thinking maybe if I see him again, I'll have sex with him. Like, is that terrible? And I loved her response. She said, I'm really interested that you're asking me if that would be terrible rather than asking if it would be fun.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wait a minute. That's totally different.
Would it be fun? Was it fun? Did you do it?
He ghosted me. I never saw him again. But it was okay. Like what I really needed was that brain shift. It wasn't the actual sex experience.
Absolutely.
I met up with a couple and I had a threesome. I I did all sorts of things that I never would have thought. I eventually ended up taking a trip to a swingers resort, basically a sex resort in Jamaica by myself for 5 days. And I went there thinking that, oh, I'm going to go and have all these really exciting sex experiences, like things that I would never have access to. It turned out that trip for me, I didn't really have any sex experiences while I was there. It was not the right venue for me.
Okay.
But what I did was lay naked on a beach for 5 days.
Whoa.
Surrounded by other naked people.
Yeah.
And begin to understand that my body fit right in. Nobody was looking at me and being like, get off the beach. What are you doing here? You
were not being rejected.
I was not being rejected. And I was looking at other women. My mindset has shifted a lot now around body neutrality as well. So I think I would have a different experience now where I wouldn't be so focused on weight. But at the time, I looked at women who were 2 and 3 times larger than me, who were still receiving a lot of attention and desire, and looking at them and being like, oh, like my body, I carry extra weight, but my body is a very classic hourglass figure. Mm-hmm. And like they're getting attention and people are attracted to them. So what does that mean about me? Yeah. That probably means that I'm acceptable too.
More than acceptable. So this sounds like a crazy, wonderful experience. At what point did you get the idea to start your podcast, Good Girls Talk About Sex?
So during this whole journey, I had a group of close girlfriends online. One of the ways that I sort through things is through writing.
Mm-hmm. Same.
And so I was writing about these experiences as I was having them and sharing with this group of girlfriends. And at first I was like, oh, this is TMI, like, this is going to be awful. And then every time I posted, they were like, oh my God, tell us more. We want more details. Like, there's no such thing as TMI. Just keep telling us everything. And the more I told them, not only did they respond by wanting to know more and by supporting, like they were so deeply supportive of what I was going through, but also they started telling me their own stories, and both the hard ones and the good ones. The more that they told me their stories, the more that I wanted to hear. Mm-hmm. And that was when I thought, we're all thirsting for these conversations and we're not having them. So that was where the idea for the podcast came, was really just to create a space where we could talk about our sex lives.
That's awesome.
In real, honest terms, knowing that we care about each other and we want to support each other. It's really, really important to me to have a wide variety of experiences on this podcast and see them all through a completely non-judgmental, non-shaming lens.
I love it. So all of you who are ready to take that on, you got to go and listen to Good Girls Talk About Sex.
Yes, please. And then once you listen and you're like, oh, I want to tell my story, let me know because I want to interview you.
Okay. All right. Check it out, people. Go and listen. Do you just interview women?
I interview people who grow up in little girl bodies.
Okay.
So that may include trans men. It may also include gender nonconforming people. I also do interview trans women. So it's across the gender spectrum, but not
cisgendered men.
Not cisgendered men.
Gotcha. Cool. I am wondering if you have any particular sort of self-care or daily grounding rituals. You can share them in general, but I'm wondering as it relates to learning to love your body and what you've learned about sex. Do you have any particular daily rituals or self-care things that keep you grounded?
I wish I could tell you that I did.
Why do you wish you could tell me that?
Because I've done a lot of personal development work, and I know how supportive it is to have a daily practice, and I don't have one.
Okay. Well, could I entice you to start a gratitude practice?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You may or may not know this. Most of my listeners know, but I actually wrote a book, Gratitude Journal Shift Your Focus, that came out in February. And I go into my knowledge of gratitude. But what it boils down to is that our minds cannot hold negative and positive thoughts at the same time. There's actual scientific proof of it. And when we focus on gratitude, then we crowd out the other stuff.
Hmm.
And so I love the journal. It offers you different 180 entries to share actual gratitude and your own personal wins. So there's a little bit of a celebration component there, which we'll talk about in a second. And then 180 unique prompts for connecting you with unique forms of gratitude.
I love it.
But you don't have to journal, right? Like there are a lot of different ways to express gratitude, but I would love to encourage you to give something like that a try. It's very simple. It doesn't take more than a couple minutes a day, and it has this beautiful, huge impact.
It's funny. Absolutely. I love it. I love everything about it. I used to keep a blog called The Miracle Journal.
Nice.
That was all about
Similar,
finding the little miracles that happened every day.
Very similar. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, so the journal actually prompts you to share your wins and your high fives. So how do you celebrate success?
This is something also that I am still learning.
Okay.
I grew up, again, my family was very sort of high pressure. Like you don't do something unless you're good at it.
Oh boy.
And you don't actually celebrate anything unless it's perfect, and nothing is ever perfect. So
are we moving away from that? I hope, Leah.
I am really working to consciously move into.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
It is a challenge. Some days I do it better than others.
Although I bet if you stop and pay attention, and I really encourage you and all of our listeners to do this because it works. I'll bet you celebrate in some ways and you don't even know that's what you're doing. Whether it's, I just finished this great interview and I'm so excited to put it out. I'm going to go have a cup of coffee or take a walk or read a book, or I got to call somebody and share, like, for me, like, oh my God, we crossed the 23,000 download mark, like whatever it is, those things count as celebration, taking a moment for yourself, pausing, reflecting, sharing. To me, those are all forms of celebration.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that one of the things that I still am sorting out for myself is what that looks like, because my go-to has always been food.
Oh, yeah.
And I am wanting to renegotiate my relationship with my food. So finding a different way to celebrate is important for me.
Well, I would love to be kept informed as you sort of develop new ones and find ones that really make you feel fantastic in work. Will you keep in touch with me and let me know?
Absolutely. I would love that.
I love that. That's awesome. Leah, we could have this conversation for a long time, and maybe I'll get to be on your show, which sounds like it would be a lot of fun. But we do have to ask the final question, which is something that I'm super passionate about. What is your favorite charitable organization to support?
Lately, my big push has been for an organization called ARC Southeast. And my podcast listeners know that during season 2, I was donating a portion of my Patreon proceeds to them.
We do that on our Patreon too.
Yay!
Yay!
So ARC Southeast it's an organization in the southeastern United States where abortion services are becoming harder and harder to find. And in many cases, they are actively working to legislate them out of existence. And ARC Southeast helps those people who need family planning services to access them. They don't actually provide them themselves, but if somebody needs, money for a bus ticket or for a hotel room, because some of those states are now requiring 72-hour waiting periods. And if you don't have resources, that means that to stay over in a city far away from you because there might only be one facility in your state. And if you have to take a 6-hour bus ride to get there and then stay over for 3 nights, that means that abortion is essentially not available to you. Mm-hmm. This is an organization that helps people to connect with the services they need and then to sort out the logistics and the financial piece of making it happen.
I love that. Thank you for sharing it. I'm so glad that there are people there doing that work. I actually think I recently read an article about an organization similar. I'm not sure if it's the same one. But listeners, this is my call to action for you, as it is every week. Learn about the organization if you have something to share with them, wherever you're located, time, money, energy, or just like their page, share it, maybe tell somebody else that it exists. We're coming together. We're making the world smaller in a really beautiful way by supporting one another and lifting each other up. So thank you very much, Leah, for sharing that. Would you tell us your 3 words one more time?
Absolutely. Sex, reclamation, and healing.
They're fantastic words. I think we covered all of them. This has been such a lovely, inspiring conversation. So many things. It feels connective to me. I hope listeners out there are hearing some things that they can say, oh, yes, me too. And I can own that and I'm going to be okay. And there's nothing wrong with me.
Yes.
So it's beautiful. Your journey is fun. Your personality is fantastic. Thank you so very much for being here with us.
Thank you, Heather. This has been an absolute delight.
So listeners, I want to know, what did you think of this conversation? Share with us your feedback by calling 312-646-0205. You will leave a message and then I can hear all the goodness. I want to hear what you love. If there's anything you'd like to hear differently, share that with me as well. If you enjoy the show, and I hope you enjoy the show, I hope you love the show, I invite you to join our Brave community and become a supporter on Patreon. Not only do you get some very cool swag, but for as little as $4 a month, you can help us create a big impact and bring Brave-centered living to everyone all over the world. Visit us at patreon.com/bravefiles to learn more information. I am delighted that you joined us today. I cannot wait to talk with you again next week. This is Heather Vickery reminding you today and every single day to go out and choose bravely. Today's show was brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audibletrial.com/thebravefiles and browse their unmatched selection of audio programs. Download a title of your choice for free and start listening. It's that simple. Just head to audiotrial.com/thebravefiles. You've been listening to The Brave Files, stories from people living courageously. To learn more about the show, find our show notes, or get some great bonus content, visit thebravefilespodcast.com. And we'd love to know what you think. You can give us a call at 312-646-0205. Let us know your thoughts on the episode, the show in general, or maybe share with us how you're out choosing bravely. This episode is brought to you by Vickery & Co. Success Coaching, coaching that helps you maintain a life well lived and a business well run. Learn more at vickeryandco.com. Our music is produced by Matt Lewis. Follow him on Instagram at mattmmusic or visit his website, theunionband.com. We couldn't do any of this without our extraordinary audio engineer, Andrew Olson. Learn more about him and check out his work at findandrewolson.com. And special thanks to our associate producer, Kim Statler. I'm your host and executive producer, Heather Vickery. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.